Welcome to another episode of Code for Thought. Ibis, in case you're wondering, is a verb in Latin and means something like go or proceed. Ibis, spelled exactly the same way, is the name of a species of long-legged wading birds. And it also happens to be the name of the organization that my guest for this week, Dr. AJ Lauer, set up in 2023, Thriving Ibis. How she came about this name is something that AJ will explain a little bit later, but suffice to say that it has something to do with her drive to make the working environments in tech, and in particular in high-performance computing, more open and welcoming. AJ is no stranger to the field of high-performance computing and has been working for national labs in the US before creating her own organization. And on top of that, she also worked closely with women in HPC and indeed was the chair of inclusivity at the Supercomputing Conference in St. Louis, Missouri in the US in 2021. Taking a look at the demographics page of SC21, the Supercomputing Conference in St. Louis, might give you a hint why people like AJ and the members of Women in HPC work hard to open up the workspace to candidates from groups who, for various reasons, are having a hard time of finding their way and building a career in tech and HPC. AJ and I talk about this in the following conversation, so here she is. Hello AJ, very nice to meet you again, and we're talking about Thriving Ibis today and the work that you do there and what got you there, but maybe you can introduce yourself first.
Sure. Hi, Peter. It's good to see you again. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Dr. AJ Lauer. I use she, her pronouns. And I have had the joy of working within the high performance computing field for a little bit over 8 years. I spent the first 10 years of my career working in higher education administration. I have run residence halls. I have taken students on trips around the nation with student government, and have, all the stories and mishaps to tell about those fun adventures. And then I landed in high performance computing in this amazing role at the National Center for Atmospheric Research, where I was able to take all of those kind of wild and wacky experiences working in the college environment and apply them to supporting the workforce within high performance computing.
That's quite a different workforce, though, isn't it, compared with schools?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
So what exactly did you do at the National Center for Atmospheric Research?
I was in charge of workforce development within the high performance computing lab. So that meant things like running the internship program. When I started, I ran the internship program and I was in charge of recruiting events and outreach and all of that good stuff. So I started in September and my first SC was, that November. It was quite the trial by fire. And then throughout the years, as my role progressed, I moved up to supervising the person who was running the internship program and doing broader workforce development work within the whole lab, tracking leadership development, making sure that people were in compliance with, required courses for supervisors, doing some executive coaching for our managers and supervisors within the lab. And I also was one of the founders of a diversity and inclusion class throughout all of the National Center for Atmospheric Research called Union, which is a 4-part class that covers privilege, race, gender, and bystander intervention, all within the U.S. context.
Let's go back a little bit. What made you go into HPC in the first place? Was this a job opportunity or was there something else that drove you into it?
It was, divine providence. I had left a rough job. At that time, I was not very active on LinkedIn, but by chance, I got a notification from LinkedIn saying, hey, you may be interested in this role. And I actually opened the email, which I didn't typically do. But it turned out that the job was basically all of those things that I had done within the university environment, running summer programs, working with students, developing workforce, diversity and inclusion, and just plunked into the world of high performance computing. What was also kind of funny about it is that my husband works in computing in weather. And so through being with him for so long, I actually had a pretty good understanding of how compute was used to support the atmospheric sciences. So it was pretty ironic that I ended up at the National Center for Atmospheric Research in the HPC division. Everybody would be like, well, why shouldn't he be the one who's there?
Okay.
Nope. It was just a weird twist.
So how different was it then? So I'm trying to get a picture of what the work environment is like when you move from university and doing students, and then you move into the world of HPC.
Sure. So in universities, your clients, the students, live on site. They're right there physically. And so when I was running a residence hall, I was getting calls at 11 o'clock at night, 1 o'clock in the morning, being called in to, meet the ambulance and mediate roommate conflicts and all of that kind of college learning experience.
Let's call it that.
Let's call it that. When I moved into NCAR, it was not an on-call type of role for most of the year. So I went from having students call me for things all the time to really only having on-site students during the summertime, which was a huge change for me. It was the first time in my career that I hadn't been on call in some way. So that was amazing. But as far as the people that I was working with, I've worked with a lot of different kinds of people in those student environments. So I've worked at a Big Ten university. I have worked at and studied at Hispanic serving institutions, including a community college, and I had worked at an engineering school. So working with the HPC folks was much more similar to the engineering school population, but older. So, a lot of the same idiosyncrasies, a lot of the same ways of thinking, and just in a slightly different field.
Normally, when we think about engineers and engineering and tech, we usually think about people in their 20s, on T-shirts, skateboards, yada, yada. And here you are saying the demographics in HPC is a little bit different. Did I get this right?
Yes. So certainly different than the college student, right? Your average college student is 18 to 23 years old. But from what data we have about the field of high performance computing, and that's a tricky thing to nail down, from what data we have, we know that the HPC field is a little bit older than other areas of tech, generally 25 to 35, the t-shirts, the pajama pants. Within high performance computing, it is more 45 plus. When I wrote my dissertation, the mean age of my respondents was 46.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And the most recent demographics we have from Supercomputing Conference, which is the largest data set that we have of people who identify as working within supercomputing, because they have 10,000 plus attendees per year. The 25 to 36 was 22% at SC21, and almost everybody else was older than that.
That constitutes maybe a long-term problem for the community, doesn't it? Because they will leave the workforce, and at the same time, we have increasing pressure of getting people into HPC because there's a higher demand now. Is that what drove you to Thriving Ibis, to say, well, okay, we have a gap. We have people who grow older, will probably leave at some stage. We have not enough people coming in, and maybe we need to widen the field a little bit.
Yeah, so it wasn't so much about the age. As I was running my internship program at NCAR and working really hard on the climate within our HPC lab, which I'm really proud of them. There is a fantastic awareness of diversity and inclusion there. The leadership is doing a great job of advocating for women, recruiting people of color, trying to get those students from the internship program into the organization. I'm very proud of the HPC lab at NCAR. And we were bringing in all these amazing students, and then they would go out into various places within the high performance computing field, and they would come back and they would tell these stories of being told women aren't as good at coding as men, of being followed around in stores in their new home that they moved to for their job because they were one of the only people of color in the area. And in addition, they were also experiencing some things at work that were making them feel like, well, maybe my race is the problem here. And so as I was working on these programs within NCAR and also within the broader HPC field, I was getting these reports about the culture within HPC and how that was preventing more diverse individuals from entering, but then also staying within the field. And so when I did my doctoral work, I wrote an entire dissertation about the culture within high performance computing and how it impacts diversity and inclusion. I was the inclusivity chair for SC21, and I started to do broader work within the high performance computing field to keep working on the culture. And so when I got to a point where it felt like it was probably time to move on from NCAR, I said, you know what? I really care about this work. I really want to continue to work on this culture within HPC and help make it a better place so that these incredible students who want to work in this field feel like they can stay.
So you mentioned your thesis a couple of times. What did you actually find out in your investigation on culture? So you already alluded to some of it, like it's probably male-driven, sort of more in the older range, sort of 45 plus. What other cultural impediments, for lack of a better word, are there?
One of my favorite parts of my dissertation was looking at people's understanding of the experiences of other people within high performance computing. So I had a bank of questions that asked, how welcoming is high performance computing for? And it asked a series of identities for white women, for women of color, for white men, for men of color, for transgender individuals. I mean, I've got data for how we view people with disabilities, all that good stuff. What was fun about that data was that I was able to take, based on the demographic information they filled out in another part of the survey, I was able to compare how, for example, white women rated how welcoming HPC was for white women versus how welcoming everybody else thinks it is for white women.
Okay, so
right?
different in perception, more or less.
Difference in perception. And so with white men, just spot on. We understand what the experience is like for white men. There was very little difference in how everybody else rated how welcoming HPC was for white men and how welcoming the white men said. On both factors for women, for white women and women of color, there is a gap.
Okay.
White women and women of color both rated the welcoming feeling of high performance computing significantly lower for themselves than how everybody else was perceiving it for them. And that for me is one of the most significant things that came out of my dissertation, right? I wish that I had that data from before the start of women in HPC, because I bet that gap would have been even wider. Women in high performance computing has done so much work to educate the population, to bolster the women within HPC, to build allyship. And so I'm positive that they are responsible for that number being smaller than maybe what it was in 2015, 2014, before they started the organization. So that was really interesting, that gap with our understanding of women. There was also a significant gap in the understanding of people who are trans and non-binary. Again, people thought that it was much more welcoming than how trans and non-binary people rated it for themselves. My N on that was very small. And so I can't really say that it was significant, but I don't think any of us would be surprised to hear that there would be a difference there. I would love to study that further with that part of our population. And interestingly, the experience of men of color was spot on. At least in the group of people who responded to my survey, we seem to have a good understanding of the experiences, or at least how welcoming the field is for men of color. That whole data set was really fascinating.
That is very fascinating, because if you do have a difference in perception, so let's say that I am a white guy, and I'm in this demographics of 45 plus, and well, definitely. And if you think that, oh, it's all very well, you think there's no problem in welcoming white women or women of color or transgender, then why would you want to do anything about it? Whereas the people themselves think, okay, well, there is a problem and something needs to be done about it. So how do you convince that? And then I guess will lead us eventually to why Thriving Ibis.
There are two things. And I tried to do this with my role in SC21 as the inclusivity chair. And I'm really happy with some of the progress that they've continued to make in that space in the last couple of years. But there is the creation of space for the people in those identity groups so that they can meet one another and mentor one another and support one another and gripe with one another so that they can, blow off steam and feel like they can feel included within that space and feel like they have their people. Just the existence of those spaces is a great educational tool for everyone else, because they say, well, why do you need to have this space? Why does this exist at supercomputing? Why are you setting aside time? And we say, well, people need a spot to let their hair down. And then you can talk about why. So there's the action, but there's also the education. And then you can start to convince people as to why they should be allies and why they should continue to build a more inclusive space. I also approach it through facts. We are finally starting to amass more research about the field of high performance computing and what's happening. We have data about conferences and the gender of people who are doing conference papers. And again, there's a huge gap. There's way fewer women presenters. I don't even know that we've collected data on trans and non-binary people presentations. But again, there's a huge gap there. But now we know. And so we can talk about, hey, you need to make sure that you are not intentionally or unintentionally cutting out the work of women and non-binary people when you are selecting conference papers.
Right. So Thriving Ibis. So first of all, what's in the name?
So when I was trying to decide what to name my company, I knew that I wanted something that was indicative of growth and indicative of progress. But I also wanted something that was a little bit sciencey. And so I started looking at Latin names of different species, and I was trying to find something good to use there. And if you have ever looked at all of the species names, you know that those are all they're actually pretty gnarly. There's not really anything that is concise or sexy or that you could remember how to spell for a website.
Yes, indeed.
But I actually studied Latin in high school in my first year of college. And so as I was poking around Latin websites, I came across the phrase ibis, which means you will go in Latin. And I looked at it and I was like, ooh, that's a good one. Like, I like that one. And then a couple minutes later, my brain connected, wait a second, that's actually a bird that I'm familiar with because I lived in Miami for 4 years.
Right.
And I was like, oh, the ibis, like, that's a cool bird. Like, what can I learn about the ibis? And it turns out that the ibis in several cultures throughout the world, kind of randomly, is associated with science and mathematics. So in Egypt, we associate it with writing and mathematics and the moon. In Japan, I found a couple of links. They're not totally verified, but that it's also associated with women's health. And in the United States, we associate the American ibis as the last bird that leaves before a hurricane shows up and the first one that shows back up after the hurricane leaves, which
okay.
Is exactly how all of the meteorologists I know behave when there's a hurricane.
That's funny. It's a bad news, good news bird then.
Totally. Yes. But it was a good nod to the meteorology background in my professional history.
Was it a hard step to actually step out of the academic world and the atmospheric center and all the other places that you've worked in and then set up your own company and start not working with one center, but actually, I guess, with many different ones? Was it hard?
Yes. It was very hard. It was quite the shock. When people ask me, I would typically recommend trying to start doing some consulting before you leave your full-time job so that you can understand it a little bit better before totally taking the leap. But I have learned an absolute ton in the last 9 months about running a business and managing the finances and marketing. Oh my goodness, the marketing. So it was a hard turn, but it's been pretty amazing as well.
Working in one center, like the National Atmospheric Center, you get to know the people, you get to connect with the people. How do you manage that when you're stepping outside? Is it easy to get access to, say, other national centers that may not know you that well? How do you manage to actually get a foot in the door, is what I'm saying, in order to enable influencing people for a wider diversity, inclusion, and equity?
So I am lucky in that my network within high performance computing is pretty broad. Through the work that I did with NCAR, I was interacting with people at other centers. I know a lot of people who have changed roles and gone to other institutions. I worked with an internship program for 8 years, and those students are out there in the world and have been super supportive and have been seeking me out for coaching and bringing me into their organizations and all of that. So I'm lucky in that I know a lot of people around HPC. And so I've been able to get some work through referrals and through my network. But that also helps when I show up in a room. I facilitated a training, 2 within the last month, where I was in an HPC space. I knew at least 20 people in the room, and I knew enough about their stories that I could interweave those into the conversations that we're having, or I could gently throw them the microphone and help them speak up about what their experiences were that I knew. It is a lot of talking to people that I don't necessarily know. And at the same time, I know enough people that I can lean into that comfort and still be pretty comfortable.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about what the organization actually does, what you actually do in Thriving Ibis. So how does it work and how or what do you focus on in your work?
My focus is really on the idea of inclusive leadership within science and technology. How can we build our workplaces? How can we build our individual skills to support creating welcoming workplaces? Places where people feel safe, places where people feel that they can bring their whole selves and their whole creativity and challenge people around them if it's necessary in order to get to the best ideas. I do that through a few different mechanisms. I do one-on-one work with people on their individual inclusive leadership skills. So I've done a lot of work with women in high performance computing who are making that transition from individual contributor to manager. That's a hard transition. And so I've done a lot of work in that space. I'm also really loving working with white men to help them figure out how they can best be allies within the space. And so those one-on-one conversations with white male leaders within high performance computing can be really rich, where they're saying, you know, I have all of these experiences and I have power. I'm understanding that I have a lot of power to impact the culture, and I don't know what to do with that. Like, you know, like everybody else pretty much looks like me. So what am I supposed to be doing to change this? Those are some really great conversations. And then I'm also doing a lot of retreat and workshop facilitation. I will come in and help a group have a conversation about inclusivity or diversity and what does that mean for their group and what do they want to do about it? Or do some skill building maybe. I did a conflict resolution workshop a couple of weeks ago to help people understand how they can have productive conflict within a group and do that in a safe way and in a way that respects the ideas that everybody else is bringing into the room. So a little bit of skill building, a little bit of one-on-one work, and just kind of gently continuing to hopefully nudge the culture forward in a way that will work for everyone.
Do you think there's been a change in recent years in the way that people are receptive to this kind of work, to having their skills changed or upped even in terms of inclusivity and diversity and equity? Or do you think we're still sort of in where we were 10 years or 20 years ago?
Oh, we're definitely advanced from where we were 10 or 20 years ago. I see both sides. In some ways, people are more receptive. People are certainly receptive to conversations about gender. I think that there's a lot in the media about gender. There's a lot within the HPC field. You know, we've got women in HPC who are so vocal. I think that within HPC, we're getting comfortable with the gender conversation. We are less comfortable with the conversation about race. And that is a space that I get a lot more pushback from people, sometimes quite vocal pushback. And so in some ways we're making progress and in some ways we're still working on it. But we're working on it. So let's keep working on it.
When you meet this kind of resistance, so what are your techniques? Because I think that might also interest other people who face similar situations.
It kind of depends on how that resistance is presenting itself. I really love the technique of saying yes and something else. What's powerful about that is that it acknowledges what the person is bringing into the experience. So yes, I understand that you have not experienced racism. And at the same time, there are other people within our field who are experiencing racism and sexism. And so we need to invite both of those perspectives into the room. Oftentimes when people have resistance, it's based on their own experiences and them saying, like, I'm not a racist. I'm not the one who's doing this. I haven't gone up to somebody and said something horrible. How can you say that you know, racism is happening? We have to give them the, yes, I understand that. I understand that you are a good person. I also view you as a good person. And these things are still happening, whether or not it's an individual basis or there are systems in place that don't support women and people of color, people with disabilities, LGBTQ people. It's a good way to broaden the conversation. Let's talk about the whole scope of what is going on all at the same time.
It sounds a little bit like moving people out of their own bubble a little bit. The other question that I have is that yes, and that's my experience too. People are readier today to talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion, But are they also willing to do anything about it in their workplace? So they go to the conference, they think, yeah, that's a great idea. But once they get back to the desk, does anything actually change? Is that your perception as well? Is it just me? Or do you think that people are actually taking something away other than, yeah, I think it's important to talk about it? But
I think the issue is not so much willingness as understanding what to do. People can go to DEI sessions at conferences and say, yes, I totally believe in this. I want to see the field improve. I'm all bought in. And then they get back to their desk and they're in their day-to-day. They've got 8 million emails that came in while they were at the conference that they have to deal with. They've got tickets. They've got, whatever it is they have going on. It's much harder to see once you are in your normal realm and you're just kind of on cruise control, how to make changes that will have impact. And so a lot of what I talk to people about, the white men who want to talk about inclusive leadership, is, okay, like I get it at a certain level. I understand that this is important and I just don't know what to do. What does this even look like? And so we talk about making sure that you're paying attention to who is speaking and how much they are speaking in meetings. When a woman or a person of color or anybody with a marginalized identity presents an idea, is it getting immediately shut down? And then, very importantly, is it later being said by someone with more positional or relational power and being taken up as a good idea? It's by challenging those little things that happen every day and understanding how to see it and how to address it in the moment that we can be most effective at creating the culture change.
Sounds like a lot of work ahead, which leads me to the last two questions that I have for you today. One of which is, what lies ahead for Thriving Ibis?
I am just having so much fun.
Okay, that's good.
It's so much fun. I love working one-on-one with people. I love to facilitate retreats with either groups of people who are already working together or who have never met before, and helping them go through a learning process together and seeing people grow and challenge themselves and challenge other people and start to make that change. So everything that I do will be within that inclusive leadership space, from presentations to, I have a talk coming up in Denver that's about reframing imposter syndrome into an imposter monster concept. Just trying to take things out into the world and create that change through, whatever way that I can. Small groups, large groups, it's all fun.
So if you had a crystal ball and looked into the future, say 5 years ahead, so where would you hope you'd be by then?
Where would I hope I would be, or where would I hope the field of high performance computing would be?
Well, how about both?
Okay. My goal, I would really love to expand what I am doing to include some other full or part-time facilitators. I've already had the opportunity to pull in some of my colleagues who are amazing facilitators to help me out with different experiences. And that's been really neat to get them a chance to interact with different people and to have my rising tide float some other boats as well.
Okay.
I would really like my business to expand to a point where I can have multiple people that are working for me on a regular basis. I think that would be really powerful. And I would love for Thriving Ibis to be the sought after resource for people within high performance computing who are looking to work on their inclusive leadership skills. Within HPC, we've done so much work on gender. We still have so much work to do. I would love to see HPC start to have more conversations about race within high performance computing. I would love for us to really take a look at how we are welcoming in Hispanic serving institutions and minority serving institutions and people from countries that are super tiny that don't have access to HPC resources. How are we really broadening the impact of HPC and making sure that it is inclusive of everyone, that the work we're doing within HPC is representative of everyone, and that it's benefiting everyone? I think that the next step in that direction is to start and continue to have some really good conversations about how race and ethnicity are showing up in our field.
Thank you so much. That was great. And I think it's an important work. And I think there's something called Conway's Law that I always come back to, which is that the kind of organization we have shapes the work we ultimately produce. And I think we should all take that seriously, because I think we want to make the world a better place. It starts with us in the work. workplace.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I enjoyed very much the talks. Thank you so much for your time, AJ, and I wish you all the best for the future.
Thanks so much for having me, Peter. I appreciate it.
Well, I think AJ has some valuable tips on how to shape difficult conversations in the workplace. And as we said towards the end of our chat, changes in the workplaces don't happen by fiat, at least not in all cases. We too can shape the way our working environments look like. If you're interested in AJ's work, look up the link to Thriving Ibis in the show notes. I also included a link to the demographics page for Supercomputing 2021, which is the latest available dataset that I could find, and you will also find a link to Women in HPC as well. Finally, if you have a comment or a suggestion for the show, you can contact me directly from the show notes. There is a link right at the top. Or you could leave a review on your podcast app or contact me on Mastodon, LinkedIn, or good old email. Oh, time's up. See you next time. But before I forget, this podcast is covered by the Creative Commons license. See ya.